Kia ora and welcome to the Creative Matters podcast, where we have inspiring conversations with New Zealand artists. I'm your host, Mandy Yarkich. These conversations are intimate, uplifting and insightful. The guests on the show have absolutely enriched my life, and I'm sure their stories will have the same effect on you. Thank you so much for joining me to listen to these amazing people speak about what drives them, the way they work, and their personal takes on life. Matthew Browne is an abstract painter living in Tāmaki Makaurau Auckland. He was born in London in the UK and relocated to New Zealand in 1991. Matthew's striking geometric paintings feature sharp lines with bold experimental colour palettes. His process starts in exploring formal relationships in colour and form and develops greater complexity as the work progresses. He has been making and showing paintings and sculptures for more than 40 years. After many years of teaching visual arts in both the community and tertiary sectors, Matthew founded his very own art school, Browne School of Art, in 2013. We have a wonderful chat, and I loved welcoming Matthew into my studio at Muriwai. In this episode, Matthew talks about how he wants to make paintings that have an untroubled aspect to them in response to the crazy cacophony of everyday life, and for people to feel a moment of solace when viewing and experiencing his work. He shares how his work and process shifted from more figurative, externally motivated paintings over the years to abstract and more internally driven expressions. We discuss his yearning for a sense of balance, order and stillness, which comes about in his current paintings through the relationships of colour. He uncovers the mysteries behind his painting titles, he shares his painting process, and he has some really fantastic advice for artists young and old. And of course we talk about how and why he founded Browne School of Art in inner city Auckland. Hello Matthew.
Hello, Mandy.
Nice to meet you.
It's great to meet you too.
Thank you.
At last.
Yes, at last. I have been badgering away at you to come out to Muriwai.
Yeah, well, I'm very flattered that you asked me.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you do seem one of those people who a lot of people know.
Yeah, well, I mean, through the school and, over the last 10 years, there have been a lot of people who've come through. So, I mean, we have 300 people a term, pretty much. And so, people get to know who you are after a while.
Which is
and
lovely.
what you do.
Yeah, so good. And I'm sure you inspire many people going through your school. So we'll talk about your school a little bit later. That's Browne School of Art. How's your week been?
This week has been pretty busy at school. Been quite a lot doing. I've started going back to the studio. My father died in June, and I found that to be quite a realignment, I suppose I would say. So after that, I had in June I just had my exhibition at Gowlangsford, and so I'd been working consistently to that point, and then Dad died, and it was like, poof, I just stopped. And,
I'm so sorry.
Well, he was 92 and it was inevitable, but it strikes you quite hard. I mean, I had a very close relationship with him. He was a painter too.
And you look a bit like him.
Yeah, weird, eh?
Isn't that nice? He lives on.
He lived a long and fruitful life. I mean, really a rich life, and he was an extraordinary man. And actually, in many respects, I've only really appreciated the kind of man he was in the last wee while. And of course, I've thought about him a lot since he went. But his legacy through me is felt. I can feel it a lot. All the things he said and talked to me about. he was very philosophical about all sorts of things. That was his thing. He was quite a deep thinking, spiritual sort of man in many respects, and always encouraging and very positive. In fact, there's so many things about him that I wish I could just kind of package and put in my pocket and keep for myself. But
you probably do have that just through your personality.
I've got some of those things, but my wife would probably tell you that I am more difficult than that, and that I go up and down. I yo-yo quite a bit. But Dad was always, or seemingly, pretty constant, you know.
And your dad was Michael Browne, and he was an art educator and, as you say, a painter. So I imagine he had a huge influence, and your mother too, she was a potter.
Yeah, she's alive, but she's got Alzheimer's.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And about 8 years ago, she just suddenly announced she was going to stop. And I think it was at that point where she felt that something wasn't right. You know, she had lost her sense of who she was momentarily at that point, and consequently she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So she made the announcement, I'm going to give up, and had her last studio sale. Dad actually stopped painting about probably 5 or 6 years ago when he was about 86, 87. But he couldn't bear to announce it. So he did it completely differently. We moved his studio from Shelley Bay in Wellington. We moved him back home.
Really?
To Mum's studio. Moved him in there, and we set everything up with the easel and the drawing board and paper. And he did one line across a piece of paper, a little wobbly line like a horizon. And then that sat there for 5 years, more or less, without being touched or without being embellished. I kept thinking he might do another line. But he became a bit immobile, but he just wanted everything to be as it was. You know, he loved running, so he would say, "Oh yeah, my legs are coming back. I'm going to be running again soon." And that positivity is at once really admirable and also really irritating, because you can't talk to somebody like that about the end of their life, for example, because he would say, "But I'm not at the end of my life,"
which I understand. I think it's such a strange conversation.
It's a really difficult thing.
Yeah,
we asked him once about 3 or 4 years ago, what would you like, Dad? What do you want to happen to your body when you die? And he said, he looked at Mum across the table and said, I don't know, just cremate me and throw me off the top of Mount Victoria. And we said, well, we can't actually do that. And then Mum just looked at us and said, I'll have what he's having. Yeah. So it's
been a difficult few months for you.
It's been a difficult few months. And I would absolutely say that since June, when he died and my show finished, I have not wanted to paint. And I've been immersed at school, which has been kind of good too. You know, because I had a change of admin assistants, and so I needed to kind of help with that a bit. And, you know, things kind of were trucking along okay, but I needed to get more involved again and straighten a few things out.
Yeah, that's probably a good opportunity.
Yeah.
And your paintings, you know, once you are ready to come back to them, it'll be interesting to see if there's something more of your dad. I don't know. It's a hard one to know. I mean, not long before he died, I painted this big black painting called Coronach, which is a Scottish or Gaelic kind of. Actually, in Ireland they have a different word for it that I can't recall, but the Scottish word is Coronach, and it's a sort of wailing that happens when somebody dies, usually the wailing by the women. And anyway, I had been listening to some music that is quite melancholic 2 or 3 months before Dad died. But I think I felt that he was going to die. And I would not normally make a black painting. I use quite a lot of colour. But I made this black painting, and it was
a very cathartic painting to make. In fact, I made it 3 times. I made it the first time and some things went wrong technically with it. And then I did it again and something else happened. I can't recall, but it wasn't right. And so I made a third one. And that one was the one that finally got exhibited. But, normally my paintings stem from a kind of overall experience of individuality and being alive, but they're not often a kind of, I can't locate them to an absolute narrative of one particular thing, as much as in retrospect I could with that one, but it was kind of wrapped up, and I could feel that things were starting to happen to him and that he was starting to disappear. And I think that was part of my kind of, cathartic experience of trying to get through that.
And that's probably why you do feel like you need a little bit of space from that.
Then I just needed the space, and every time, and also, of course, it's been so wet and dreary over winter, and every time I went to the studio, I opened the door and it was kind of grey and cold because nobody had been in there, and I just could, if it was too much, I couldn't face it. So I would sort of look around, and I've been tidying up. That's what I've been doing, tidying up so that I'm getting ready for, the next thing, which I have to start soon because there are other things I need to work for. So,
it's good to allow yourself a little bit of time.
Bit of time. Yeah.
So can we go back? I mean,
Yes.
with Jenny and Michael as parents,
Yeah.
I'm sure you had a very fun, creative childhood.
Yeah, well, yes, it's interesting. Dad was actually born in England, in Wigan, up north in Lancashire. And then when he was about 1, his mother, Ruth Browne, who is also, the thing is, painting is very entrenched in the family. There's my grandmother on his side, Ruth Browne, and my grandfather, Alan Browne, and they were both painters, and they met at art school. They met at I Ioved, which was then called Canterbury, in around 1928.
So were you actually kind of discovering your own creativity, and, did you go through high school thinking that you love painting and showing some sort of promise at that point?
Well, it's interesting that, because, I hear people talking about that and they say, oh yes, I knew I was going to be a painter from when I was 5, or something like that. And my experience of it initially was watching Dad, and I can remember as a teenager saying to him, there's no way I'm going to be doing that. It looked too hard. He was teaching at Chelsea School of Art and he was painting in the holidays. He was different to how he disciplined his time to me. I'm better at keeping things going, constantly, more apart from the last little gap. But he found it much more difficult. So I really didn't want to have much to do with painting. In fact, when I was 14, I wanted to be a vet. And then I wasn't very good at science at school, and it came round to applications for what you were going to do when you left school, and in front of me there just appeared these applications for art schools, and I just sort of applied fairly blindly, really. But I hadn't really done much. I mean, school art, it depends on the teacher, doesn't it? School art was really left me cold. I mean, I really didn't enjoy it at all, and I got the basic pass rate for that. But I was always around painters, and with Dad and Ted Paulmore, and Bill Culbert, and those people were all part of our family. And Bill Culbert's son Ray went to the same school as me, and we all kind of hung out to a certain extent. So it was, when I think back, it's pretty hard to even realize that I might have admitted that I wouldn't paint, because it was kind of embedded in there somewhere. I couldn't really do anything else. So when the applications for art school arrived in front of me, I filled them in and sent them off very nonchalantly, and got an interview. I did a bit of searching around, and I ended up getting an interview at Browne School of Art when I was 18, And I got in there and started their foundation program, and then went through and did the 3-year degree program after that. And it was during that time that my, the seeds of a kind of a passion were planted more firmly. I mean, Dad had always talked about painting, and we'd seen him painting, of course, and I'd sat for him for portraits and all of that sort of thing. But it wasn't until my first year at art school where Dad gave me a book, The Journal of Eugene Delacroix, and I started reading that, and it's very inspiring because, you read about painters who are great painters, and then if they're frank and they're talking in an open way about their lives and their practice, you realize that they're as uncertain about what they're doing as anybody else. And he was very uncertain, and I thought, well, that's really encouraging that he wasn't just some kind of hotshot. He was amazing, but the journals are very open and very frank, a bit like Van Gogh's letters. And that suddenly inspired me, and I had been thinking in my foundation year of art school, I thought, well, maybe I'll concentrate on design, and then I flipped to maybe I'll be a sculptor. But then I got these journals, and it kind of cemented in my mind, I think I'll paint.
And it's okay to have doubts.
The doubt. Well, that doubt thing is an interesting one, isn't it? Because every time I think about doubt, I think of that Robert Hughes quote. You might know it. The greater the artist, the greater the doubt. Perfect confidence is granted to the less talented as a consolation prize.
That's so good.
and I often think about that, and how it's not good to be cocky about stuff. And even if I feel confident momentarily about painting, there's a doubt underneath that. But I have to say, the doubt is a sort of surface doubt. It's not a deep-seated doubt. I mean, deep down, I have faith in what I'm doing and what I can do. But the doubt flits around on the surface like an annoying child, getting in the way and clouding your mind and stopping you doing things. Oh, I don't know if I can do that. But deep down, you can.
There's also the comparison and, all of that stuff that artists tend to do. Comparison
with other artists, yeah. Well, that goes on quite often for a long time at the beginning, unless you're a particular kind of artist who's resolutely, managing to escape that. Most people are deeply influenced by somebody who's come before, and then you get to the point where you realize that you've got to just be you. And I mean, I go to shows all the time, and quite often I come away from them going, oh, I wish I painted like that. That would be great. And then I go to my studio and I realize I can only paint how I paint at the moment. It's like somebody telling you need to change your handwriting, and you just can't.
Yeah, and it's such a sort of reflection of you. It's you.
That's right. So what becomes more important to me anyway is what you say through your painting. So even if you're a representational painter, which I was for years and years and years, you might be learning the craft of painting, color mixing and composition, tone, and so on and so forth. But eventually what needs to happen is you need to start thinking about what it is you're trying to say through your painting. And once you find that, it's like a light bulb moment. And that helps to enable you to make the work that you should be making and not be so influenced by other painters, so that they're not always around you. I mean, sometimes when students are painting, they might have a book or two around them open of some other painter, and I'm like, yeah, but let's close that. You can read about them and look at their images, but then close the book. When you're working, just close it. You need to go into your workspace unencumbered by theory or works that you've seen, and you need to just approach it absolutely honestly, face to face at that moment. I mean, I never take any of my ideas with me consciously into the studio. I try and leave everything at the door. But you have to have faith that those things that you're interested in are going to come out.
And that takes time, doesn't it?
It's taken me my life to do that.
Yeah. It is just devoting yourself and putting in the time, and that's when you start to figure it out for yourself. But it's kind of getting through that hard patch at the beginning where you're not quite sure where you're heading.
Yeah.
I mean, I look at my art practice over the last, more than 30 years, which has always been on the side, sadly. But it's only now that I look at it in hindsight, on reflection later, that I can actually see what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And what I've been trying to say for a long time.
Yeah.
But I didn't actually think it was that cohesive as I was working. It's only now that I look back.
Well, it's interesting you're saying that, actually, because one of the things I say to students is, let's just get a bunch of work done. Let's just put your head down, make some work, and then the work will start to tell you what it is that you're doing. It will illuminate your practice if you make the work. Quite often there's pressure to sort out all of that before you start making the painting. But through the practice of painting, the answers often emerge. And that's where, of course, teaching is so useful, because you can talk to somebody who has been painting for a long time and they can give you insights into what might be happening as they look at the work. So, I mean, for me, I found that for a long time, learning about painting was the main thing. Just the practice of painting, mixing, putting on the paint. How did I want to put on the paint? What size did I want to work? What's happening with the color, and so on and so forth. But then you're right. What happens is when you do a kind of, like when I do a PowerPoint talk of my career to date, which I often do at the beginning of the year for students, it always amazes me how cohesive it seems. From the first thing as you go bump, 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 all through the years, there's a logical kind of sequence to it.
And a thread that goes through.
That's right, but you don't realize at the time. And but I think one of the really important things is to remain curious about what it is that you're doing. And even in respect of the practice that I have now, which has a certain kind of set aspect to it. I know what it is that I want, and I strive for that. Within that, there's an infinite number of variables, and those variables are things that can make the work mean something to me or not. And so I have to work through. That's why I sometimes have to redo paintings several times. I mean, some people would say, why don't you just paint over them? But actually, the way I'm painting, I can't, because I'm using acrylic or flash, very flat acrylic for base layers, and then I'm using oil on top. And if the oil goes wrong, it's impossible to know what to do with it. And the other part of it is that I want to make paintings that have a kind of an untroubled aspect to them, as a kind of respite from the crazy cacophony of everyday life that goes on. I want them to be a kind of, for people to feel a kind of momentary solace in that, which is difficult, of course, because as a student said to me the other day, the average time that people spend in front of a painting is 5 seconds. So how do you draw people in a time that we live through at the moment of fast-moving, multiple images through Instagram and so on and so forth? How do you hold people and actually get them to experience a painting? It gets summed up so fast, and that's quite frustrating. But I think that's part of what I'm striving for now. I think, over the years, as I went through my figurative period, and then gradually started to work from a more internal point, things started to shift quite markedly at that point, and I started to be able to recognize what it was that I really wanted to happen in the paintings, and that I wasn't governed by the external things and how they looked. And there was a certain kind of freeing aspect of that, but also it was terrifying. And at that point of slippage, of going from paintings that were externally motivated to internally, I really struggled for a period of probably a year.
And did you realise that you were making that shift at the time?
I did realise, and I panicked at one point and decided to do a self-portrait. And so I stopped and did this the self-portrait, which is a very academic painting. And I did it over a week looking in a mirror. And at the end of that time, I was quite happy with the painting, but I thought, okay, but I don't want to do that.
Mm.
And so that kind of closed off that part of it for me. And I realized that I really wanted to paint about things that were more internal and were less known. I didn't want to know what it was that I was going to be doing. There's something really exciting about not really knowing the specifics of what might happen in your work. You need to know what's going to happen on a broader sense with your work, or what it's about, or what you're dealing with. But I guess probably going to Elam in 1999, subsequently, I didn't realize it at the time, but it helped me to kind of grapple with those things of like the difference between subject and content, and how you deal with that. You know, people who are purely representational painters will use subject to govern a lot of the success of the work, I think, and then of course how they deal with that. But that this sort of thing about content and how it might be carried through the work fascinates me.
And before, so it was 2000 that you gained your honours degree at Elam. So just before you went to Elam in Auckland, had you started making that shift into more abstract work by then, or was it going to Elam that got that going?
No, I'd started the shift already, but it was wobbly. And I think, and I certainly didn't really know what it was about for me, except that I felt I needed to make these works that were internally driven. And so going to Elam, probably helped me to clarify what it was that I was interested in. And I became very interested in, things to do with the physiology and psychology of the mind. The relationship between the unconscious and the conscious, or as I prefer to call it, impulse and deliberation, which sounds less threatening or less wordy.
Can you describe the work that you were making, the paintings you were making at Elam?
Yeah, the paintings that started to be made in my second year at Elam came from looking at Carl Jung, reading about Carl Jung, and his writings about the unconscious, personal unconscious, collective unconscious, archetypes of behavior. And I got really fascinated with that. It was the first time that I'd read something like that. I'm not sure if you really would read Jung necessarily if you were not in a course structure, or Lacan or Freud or any of those people for that matter, unless it's part of your business too. And it was the first time I felt it was my business to know about this. And so I read about him, and then, Jung has this canny way of writing about psychology, and he puts it into sort of very clear compartments and, archetypes of behavior. And I got really interested in those and the visual sense that I got from them. And so I started to make some very fast, very gestural paintings at that time, which were quite varying in scale. They went from very small to very big, multi-paneled. And I started thinking about the relationship between the unconscious and the conscious mind, or impulse and deliberation. And so I would work very, very quickly at the beginning, and then I would deliberate on that, and I would start to lay on some layers onto that were more structured.
And in response to the initial
in response to
marks.
the initial part, yeah. And then that sort of set in motion a greater interest in those particular aspects of thinking that sort of escalated, I suppose. But the problem was that I started to think about things too prescriptively. And that came partly because at Elam, of course, if they say to you, which they did, oh, by the way, you need to do a lecture in the lecture hall, it's for 45, 50 minutes on your practice, you kind of have a wee panic, and you read like hell, and you make sure that you know that if somebody asks you a question about your work, that you have an answer for it. And that was good, but it also became an entrapment. And so after I left Elam, it probably took about 4 or 5 years to shake off the kind of prescriptive element that I was working with, which was very much about, the unconscious, the conscious mind, and the self that's sandwiched between the two. And these kind of paintings that had a kind of very consistent look to them, a structure to them, started to develop. And I thought of them a bit like portraits, that as human beings, ostensibly anyway, we are built the same, with a head and 2 arms and 2 legs and body, and then within that there's an infinite number of possibilities. So I thought of the paintings a bit like that.
And what were the paintings? Can you describe what they actually
were
looked
called
like?
The first group were called archetypes. I called them archetype 1 to 30, I think. And then they developed from there and became, there was a big group that started to develop called collective. So at that point, they started to have a base color, which I thought of as the base color was the world outside, the part that you would respond to. Like when you get up in the morning and it's a sunny day, you feel in a particular frame of mind as opposed to a grey day. And so I'd put down a colour onto some panels very arbitrarily, didn't really matter. And then when I went to paint, I would pick up one of the panels depending on how I felt that day, and I would put down a vertical, and the vertical would be very swiftly painted.
With a big brush.
Actually, sorry, I've got that wrong. It wasn't the vertical first. It was a wild splash of some sort, or a sweep, or a loop. And then I would put down a vertical on top of that with oil. When that had dried, I would put down another layer with oil, which was the vertical, which was my idea about the self. And that, you hear people say, oh, I'm doing an art class, so I'm trying to find myself. And so I thought of it as that. And then on top of that, I would have this horizontal that sort of tipped, like it was going to, at any moment, that horizontal that was what you saw of the veneer of the person was going to spin out of control, and you would see them for who they were really underneath that. So the thinking was very prescribed, and
was it process driven at all? Was it more about the thinking?
Not particularly. It was more to do with the thinking. But I really, I'm almost, I'm horrified at that period in a way when I think back, because of its over prescriptive nature. But the works were still beautiful, abstract. Yeah, some of them were around, and they some of them, they were good and bad.
And you still had that real connection to colour.
The colour thing happened. Well, the colour thing happened a number of years before. When I was at Camberwell, I remember we had a critique, and in the critique, Sagi Mann, who was one of the tutors, who was an amazing artist himself, he became known as the most famous blind painter of Peckham, because he became blind not long after I went to art school, and he carried on painting. Really? Yeah. Anyways, you can look him up online. He's very interesting. But he was doing a critique, and he said, "Oh, here we have Matthew's painting. Yes, the crisp, clear colour as always." And I remember looking at everyone else's, and thinking, "Well, nobody else seemed to have that." So it was something that was embedded quite early on, that need to have things being quite tidy, I suppose, or quite to have clarity to them.
And order.
And order. Yeah, I'm not very good with chaos. I look at people's work that is purely, instinctual, and I'm like, wow, that'd be great. But I actually can't seem to do that anymore. So I guess that period at art school that followed at Elam, when I was working through those things, was part of a way of trying to free myself up, and it worked for quite a long time. But then what happened is that through the 2000s, the work got more and more prescribed in a way, and I've got more and more entrapped. I started to take things out. I took out the looping stuff underneath, and they ended up just with the vertical and horizontal. And and I was interested in that for a while, and then suddenly in 2005, I realized I couldn't make one more painting like that. And I was in the studio, and it was February, and I can't make another. I can't.
Really?
I just can't make another one of those paintings. And so I got some card from a local picture framer, and it was really thick, heavy card, sort of like around A4 size or a bit bigger. And I just thought, I need some freedom now. And so I got lots of materials out, and some charcoal and chalks and gouache and acrylic and oil sticks and pastels. And I just grabbed a panel, one of these boards, and then I decided I would just empty my mind entirely and completely and work really impulsively through the whole thing, which I did. And I made a whole series, and they were called the Reform series, and I was so relieved. It was like the most, wonderful moment to have shaken off the entrapment of the kind of formulaic paintings that I felt that I'd been making. Yeah, and so those very free paintings continued for a while, and then they started to morph into paintings that became more mannered again. They were quite expressive. I like a whole bunch of them now. Like is such a crappy word for it, but I think there's some quite good painting there in those ones. But
you talk about how your paintings have some. I guess it's more the current paintings have that stillness and sort of calming the cacophony of madness that's out there.
I think this has happened over time. I've just yearned for a sense of order and balance and stillness of some sort. That's not to say that I'm not interested in movement or in shift, because I am interested in all those things, but it now comes through the relationships of colour more than the agitation of brushwork. I want the forms that I'm painting now, I want to sort of almost feel like they've landed onto the canvas without any interference from me. And those paintings, or the paintings I'm doing now, really actually came out of a whole bunch of collages that I did in around 2015-ish or something like that, where I worked very quickly, and then I decided to use collage, and I would paint paper, and then not collage from magazines, but cut up coloured shapes and forms, and the cutting, straight lines and so on, put another element into the work of exactness alongside the kind of urgency of some of the marks. And I responded to that really favourably. I thought, this is great. I really like this. And then when I started painting, that kind of harder edge aspect sort of gradually sort of started to appear in my paintings using masking tape. It's no big mystery. I'm not one of those people that says, oh yes, I did all that freehand, And it's, if you want a straight line, for crying out loud, use a piece of masking tape.
Find a tool to help you.
Find a tool, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I wanted them to start, over a period of time, they've got sharper and more exact.
And some of your shapes have amazing curves on the corners.
Yes.
How do you do that?
We can buy tape that curves.
Can you?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, you can buy tape that curves. So there you are. Yeah, there's all the secret out. So yeah, and so but it is very fraught making them, but at the same time, I'm visually rewarded by them. I actually enjoy being with them more than any other period of painting that I've made.
Really?
That's not to say that the other paintings didn't have certain affirmative things to them, but the paintings I'm making now feel like they've arrived at something. I'm slightly apprehensive about where it will go next and how it will transpire, but that the kind of silence that I'm looking for, or stillness rather than silence, is something that I find fascinating. And then I've become really incredibly interested in people's response to them. And so that sort of started to spin off into areas of interest around projection, reception, relationships between a work as you present a work and the reception that the viewer receives from it, and how they react to it, and depending on that particular day too, and how they feel. So that my interest in that started to develop, and then I started thinking about language, and I've always enjoyed language and words. I saw an interview once with Stephen Fry, and he talked about certain words being kind of delicious as they roll over your tongue, and I enjoyed that, and I enjoy that idea. But I don't want the paintings to be, very quickly deciphered. And so titling became something that started to become important, and the titles have started of late. They've come from a book called The Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows by John Koenig, which is...
I wondered where these titles came from.
Yeah, which is a book of words that he feels are missing from the English language.
Really?
And he sometimes takes words and kind of morphs them together to make a new word, or occasionally he uses an existing word and he reappropriates it and gives it another meaning.
That's very interesting.
And so I got really interested in that, about how as human beings we speak to each other using words that have been learned, and we then can understand each other, and that painting is a bit like a language. It's just that most people don't really know how to read it because they don't understand it. And so they say, they fight with themselves, say, well, what is it? What is it? What am I looking at? Instead of just spending some time with it and actually taking it for what it is. But I don't want people to really decipher it and know what it is. So I've given them titles that are mysterious. And of course, people can look up those titles if they want. Like, you can find the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, but mostly people don't. They just are baffled by it. They're baffled by the work, and they're baffled by the title.
Yeah, they're even more baffled.
They're even more baffled. And I figure that if they really want to know, they'll do a bit more research.
So some of the titles are, is it Ostis?
Oh, well, those
Ostis?
now we're
Darnus?
yes. Ostis is to do with the onset of autumn, and the painting I made for that is very green and fresh.
That makes
it's got
sense.
an olivey aspect to it, and
It's like solstice and autumn, and maybe.
Well, I think that word is a mix of words like solstice and other things that he sort of mashed together. Autumn and solstice. That gives you Ostis.
Yeah, I love it.
I became really interested in that, and I thought, well, on one hand, words that we use are like a metaphor for something. If we're using an adjective, for example, or any word particularly, it's a name that we have given to it, table, or, an emotion, angry, when we know what it means. Or it means different things to different people probably, but anyway, essentially we know what it means. And so I thought then about, paintings being like a metaphor for something, and that they could carry that thing with them. But there was no real reason why I should have to know, being the painter, exactly what those things were. Why should I have the responsibility of knowing? They've come from a place of integrity, and I make the works, and then I give them a title that is suggested through the painting. The title always comes at the end.
Okay.
After I've done them.
Right.
And sometimes quite a while after, and I jostle with them, and then I find just the right title.
Is that a way for you to process what you might have been saying?
It's a way of illuminating for myself what might have been driving me as I made the work without realizing it. And so they've developed along that route. And then this last year, I also got interested in part of my heritage, which, like so many people, is Scottish, Irish, and Cornish. And I started looking up some of the languages and words around those particular dialects, and they're quite fascinating, you know. And so now some of the titles I use are possibly Irish or Scottish or Cornish, and people look at them and some people know what they mean, of course.
And then they go back to looking at the painting
and then they go back to the painting
connection.
and they try and find maybe if they can see what that connection might be.
Which is lovely.
But one's like, there's one called Ceannas, 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 I think. And it's a big red painting. It's the one you've posted on social media.
Yeah.
And that painting had this red base on it, and then I put the dark shape, which was almost like a letter E or something on the left, and it sat there for a while, and it had this very fine white line that ran down the center of it as a way of kind of stilling it further, because the E was sort of tipped. And it sat for 6 months, and I thought it was kind of done, but I wasn't quite sure. I wasn't sure enough to put it away, and so I sat there for a while, and then I thought it's actually not right, and so I put in this bright pink magenta form, and it suddenly came together. And then entitling it, you know, I was going through some Irish language, and I came across Ceannas, which means a kind of conflict, when you're having a conflict with somebody, as I remember. I hope I've got that right. Somebody will tell me if I haven't.
No doubt.
And the painting seemed to have an aggressiveness to it, or a conflict to it. Two equally weighted shapes that seem to be partly interlocking or bound together in some kind of tussle. So, you know, those kind of experiences give me a lot of faith that even if I'm not exactly sure what's happening with the painting as I'm making it, my inner knowing self knows what it is, and I have trust to try and let that happen. Yes, you've learned to trust. So it is a huge amount of trust and
confidence, I think.
Well, yeah, confidence is something, you know, I talk about with the students quite a bit, because, you know, I say, look, if you're an actor, and I'm always intrigued by this, how actors will say, you know, oh God, every time I go on stage, I'm petrified and I feel sick. And you're like, well, they're experienced actors. But they go on to the stage and they do their performance and they get a rousing applause and they come off and they're high as a kite with the whole experience. And painting is, you know, really can be a bit like that. If you approach it feeling wobbly or saying, oh no, I can't do this, ooh, I'm not a very good painter, and you pick up a tiny brush and start outlining things, well, the painting will just follow that course of wobbly action, and nobody will really believe you. You know, at the end of the day, nobody will be convinced. So sometimes you have to actually act, and you have to actually say, I'm putting on my convincing boots here, and I'm a good painter, you say to yourself. And I'm approaching this painting, you have to approach it like it's a mirror. It's going to mirror what you show. So if you show uncertainty, the painting shows uncertainty. If you pick up a bigger brush and show assuredness, the painting pushes back assuredness. And you take on board that affirmation. So it's really important. You know, lots of the time I say to students, put that brush down, take another brush. Or actually another one is don't hold the brush so far down. A lot of people want to control it, so they hold it right down on the metal ferrule.
Like a pencil.
Like a pencil. And I'm like, yeah, what do you think that long handle's for? They're like, I don't know. So it's so that you can put your hand up the top. So slide your hand away, put your hand at the top of the brush and start moving from your shoulder a bit more. And then they go, whoa, this is great.
Yeah.
This is great, you know.
It's a whole different
It's
experience.
a whole different thing. So that kind of action where you try and give people confidence as they work can be really affirming and can help people to make paintings that they need to paint to make. If you're dwelling in this kind of whole sea of uncertainty and you're using a tiny brush all the way through, of course some people need a tiny brush, I know, but especially when you begin the work, if you're starting like that, you sort of entrap yourself often into something that's certain and predictable, and it doesn't enlighten you in any particular way or give you any surprises. And that's something actually years ago when I was teaching, when I was going through this kind of that period of prescriptive painting, I was talking to a class and I said, you need to surprise yourself. And I thought, Matthew, you need to surprise yourself. So let's go back to painting and let's surprise ourselves. What are you going to do me today? And that was really, those kind of periods are really good shake-ups for getting you going and thinking about what it is you're doing. But, even though my paintings are very controlled now, I still don't know what I'm doing half the time because I never know what's going to happen. I'm still doubtful about them and they can still go very wrong. And so I'm never really certain about what's going to happen. And that kind of knife edge keeps me on my toes and motivated and,
keeps you
and quite excited about it. Yeah,
which is so great.
That uncertainty, yeah.
And I read that you have described your paintings as things that tell truth about colour.
Tell truth about colour. Gosh, did I say that?
You did.
That's a profound thing to say. Truth, I think what I might have been talking about is personal truth. And so, every painter has to find their own personal truth. That is basically saying, if you're painting, what sort of painting are you meant to be doing? How are you operating in that arena? And of course, when people start painting, they don't know what their truth is. And they move around between one thing and another, and as you should, back and forth. But at some time you need to start to be honest with yourself about what your truth is. And my truth comes through color relationships and form, and the suggestion also of the human body and of the environment. And those things all come in a very kind of sneaky, unwitting kind of way. They just come in through the back door and I realize they're there. They're not things that I think about when I'm starting to work, but they're things that what make people say, that painting looks like somebody sitting watching TV or something, or some other aspect. And I'm like, yeah, okay, good. That's fine. I don't mind what people see in them.
Yeah, how they see things.
No, not at all. But I am interested in there being a conundrum, where people are puzzled by it. They think they see something, but they're not really sure about that, and it's not really giving enough away to be absolutely certain.
But they're such beautiful paintings. It's just totally up my street.
Thank you.
I really, really love them.
Thanks.
I love the flatness of the colour.
Yeah.
How do you achieve that?
I love gesture in painting, and like I mentioned, I have been gestural, but for some reason, over a period of time, this sort of flatness evolved, and it's now become something that I'm partially entrapped by, but also endlessly fascinated by. So first of all, part of that came from collage.
Yeah.
But part of it also comes from a need for some kind of order in a world, especially of late, where that seems really difficult to obtain, in the last few years with what we've all been through. There seemed to be even more of a need for that. So I use flash acrylic paint, and I put it down in the first layers very flatly. I use a roller quite often. I smooth it out with a brush. Nothing mysterious about any of that.
And it's all one colour that you're layering?
There's one colour that I'm layering, and that sometimes I mix. Sometimes I don't mix. It just depends on what the colour is. And then on top of that, I start to bring about, often there's a linear element of some sort, something that holds the work in some kind of point of tension. And then around that, I often will use the top layer as oil, and I bring the oil in as a way of bringing in a kind of, and oil has an additional depth to it, and it also has transparency or semi-transparency. It's not entirely flat. And I want it to have a certain vulnerability. It's very easy, isn't it, to kind of pigeonhole certain paintings and say, well, oh yeah, that's hard edge painting, or that's gestural painting, or whatever. But I kind of recoil at any suggestion that I'm a hard edge painter in many respects, because hard edge painting for me feels to me more to do with pure analysis than anything else. And my paintings, I don't paint them like that. I try and paint them from a point of view of harnessing some kind of feeling or connection, emotive feeling or connection. And so the oil paint brings in a kind of a slightly more vulnerable layer. It's sort of semi-transparent. It's got depth to it, and it often has a particular, maybe a partial shine to it because of the oil.
Are you putting the oil on top of, so you've put down a magenta shape, are you then putting magenta oil on top of that, or is the oil another shape?
Another separate
layering?
shape. Yeah, so the oil is an entirely separate shape. But you see, even as I'm talking about this, I can see myself, having talked about making formulaic paintings earlier on, I can see myself and anyone who's listening to this saying, well, you could apply that now if you like, but I can't because all of them are governed by extremely separate forms. With the earlier paintings that were more prescriptive, the forms were the same. The colours were different, but the forms were the same. But now the forms are all different, and the colours are different.
And the compositions.
So I spend a huge amount of time trying to find the right shapes that seem to carry the meaning or a sense of weight within them that I want. And I try and keep really open and really curious about what those things might be and what the work might suggest to me.
It's really interesting. And pardon my ignorance, but I did not think you could put oil onto acrylic.
Yeah, you can put oil on acrylic, but not acrylic on oil.
Okay.
Because the oil is too slippy for the acrylic. Yeah, so you can lay it on top quite safely. It's quite a good practice, actually, if you're an oil painter of any sort, to put, if you want to hurry it up, you put a layer of acrylic underneath and you can then move into it almost straight away with the oil.
Great.
So it makes it flexible.
Beautiful. And you paint on linen, and sometimes...
Yeah.
Well, you used to. Are you currently painting on linen?
Yeah, I am.
And you used to leave the linen showing a bit.
I do.
Or
I
you
do
sometimes?
still.
Yeah.
Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't.
Yeah.
Sometimes,
I love that.
Sometimes I use the linen, like as I'm looking at the canvas, I use the linen as the first point of reaction, or the bouncing off point, and I want to acknowledge it, so I give it some space, and that space then means that the first layer I put down has a shape to it, rather than it just being an overall homogeneous background. It suddenly has a form to it, with maybe a scoop out of it, or a side knot there, or whatever it happens to be, and it gives it also, a kind of an aspect of it being real, that this is on cloth, it's on linen, it's a painting on linen. It draws people's attention back to that point, and also it's a beautiful color.
It's a beautiful
it's
color.
a foil for all the color that I use.
Yeah.
It's this kind of neutral, natural, earthy color.
Yes.
So
It works really well.
and it also has this kind of weave to it that's sort of what you'd call a lively weave. That is, it's got lots of like little knots and incidents in it.
It's quite textural.
Which I quite like, rather than the kind of absolute uniform cotton duck aspect.
And it's such a lovely contrast to the colour and the flatness.
Yeah. Yeah, well,
it's
that's the
beautiful.
thing. And I mean, actually, the interesting thing about that, you mentioning that, the forms that I'm making are, they're very firm-edged, very precise. And, if I really wanted to make it easy for myself, I'd use board or I'd use timber, some ply or something that's already flat. And then when you put tape on it and you're making shapes, you guarantee they're going to be sharp as a die. But it's too sharp. And so the linen brings about, I endeavor to get it sharp, but it's got a tiny bit of vulnerability there. It's got something there that softens that sharpness. And that's the linen, of course. And then the linen popping through amplifies that softness, that this is fabric. And so it's not all hard and impenetrable, which I really don't like. I'm not actually that keen on hard edge painting, funnily enough. It's just not something I like. And sometimes people will send me an image of something and say, "Oh, you like this, Matthew?" And it's a hard edge painter. And I'm like, no, not really. No. So I want them to have that. I really do want them to have a sense of feeling to them. I'm still see myself as a romantic painter in that sense, that I believe in the ability for painting to kind of harness feeling. I can hear my
Yes, I can
belly.
hear your tummy.
Yeah.
You must be hungry. It's lunchtime.
Yeah, must be.
But the emotion of your work, they are very emotive, and I guess that comes from the colour.
Yeah, well, it's a very subjective thing too. But yeah, a lot of it comes through the colour and the relationships that are set up, the kind of, the harmonic relationships and the discordant ones and the way they relate. And they might, pull people in, or they might repel people, or they might unwittingly make people think of certain things or certain periods that we've lived through. And that seems to be quite a good connecting mechanism for lots of people. I think the amazing thing about colour is that it completely transcends any kind of sense of knowing. So it's very primal. People can't help but react to it, even if they know about colour and they know about harmonics and they know about certain things. They can't help but say, those colours are just doing something to me, and I don't know what it is. That's really fascinating.
Yeah, and it's great to be a part of that journey.
Yeah, so in a way, if your paintings do have lots of colour in them, you kind of you manage to get, initially anyway, quite a big audience, because people just like, whoom, they hone in on it. But the problem starts after that if you then say, well, okay, and then what else? And so, as paintings become more abstract, a sense of what might be going on needs to be considered, right? Otherwise, you just end up making patterns.
Yeah.
Well, somebody did send me a message actually not that long ago saying, your paintings remind me of my wife's fabric clothing patterns. When you're making clothes and you're cutting out certain shapes.
Oh, right, yeah.
And I thought, yeah, okay, that's good.
Yeah, I
quite
can see
like
that. Yeah, especially with the curved edges.
Yeah,
possibly.
I can see it.
Yeah.
And I thought, yeah, good observation.
Good on you. That's cool. And would you say your style is contemporary expressionist, or how do you describe your style?
No, I don't know.
Or do you need to describe it? Maybe not.
I don't know how to pigeonhole it into one of those kind of
fancy
groups,
words.
Particularly. Even to be honest with you, I even feel uncomfortable with calling them abstract entirely, because I'm not sure what, I think all paintings are kind of abstract in a way. They're all, you're even if you're observational, you're taking forms and you're considering them in a way that separates them from the actual thing themselves, and they abstract.
That's true.
It's just that there's no hook in my paintings of those recognizable things, or occasionally, as I mentioned, there might be something that somebody is reminded of. But on the whole, they stand separate from any kind of comparison outside of themselves. So, yeah, I mean, for simplicity, I could call them abstract. But I don't know, there are observational things that are filtered in the action of painting to become what they become. They're filtered from reality. They're filtered from experience. It's that sort of, an existential kind of positioning of, saying, well, I am an individual and I have my own life and I've lived my own experience, and this is part of that, and I have faith in that it's going to come out. It's going to come out through the paintings, and so you will it to come out, and you approach it like you trust that. I mean, that's a big part of it, that trust thing, and I certainly couldn't have done it. I couldn't make these paintings earlier in my career, which is strange because essentially they seem quite simple. I mean, actually, they're amazingly difficult to make.
Yeah.
They just make me weep sometimes in how difficult they are. But they have a sense in them now that feels like I've arrived at something more personal. And I certainly could not have done them years ago.
No.
I wouldn't have wanted to make them years ago. I wouldn't have known what they meant to me.
You weren't ready for that.
I would have been bored.
Yeah.
Like I would have made one and said, well, yeah, that's interesting. Oh, and I can't make another one of those. So I think, when that reminds me of people like, if you think about people like Mark Rothko, when people go to the Rothko room at the Tate in London, they are silenced by the presence of these paintings. And, but those paintings which he worked on in essentially a very similar kind of a format for a number of years are driven by a sense of meaning. And that's what holds them together. That's the glue.
Yeah.
And that's the really crucial thing. And people don't realize when they're looking at them that that's what they're experiencing, but they wonder why it's all so quiet.
It's very powerful.
And it's an interesting thing where people don't realize that they have been affected by a painting, either in its presence or afterwards. I mean, a student this week was talking about her irritation that in art history they'd had some discussion about more contemporary work, and there was a work of a yellow chain, some kind, I don't know what it was, but it was something that was, and she kept going on, but she was really irritated about it, and we all agreed in discussion in the class that it was actually quite an effective work because she could not forget it.
And she was talking about
she
it.
was talking about
which
it
is a good
constantly,
thing.
Yeah.
And
I mean, that's the thing sometimes people I find people come back to my paintings, they see them and then they remember them, and then sometimes years later they come back.
Oh, they are powerful, just like Rothko's works, I think.
Well, in a different kind of way, maybe. Yeah.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
And do you approach your paintings as a series and sort of work with a number of paintings going on at the same time?
I do. I have lots of things going on. I usually have at least 4 things going at once. So there'll be a big painting going, and I'll put down a layer on that, and then I'll move to another. So, I always work in some small ones too, and I work on those. They usually have a consistent size in each particular, consistent format and size for each particular area. So big ones are a certain size and so on. So I don't have to think about that. I want to get rid of that. Oh, what size shall I paint today? And, I want that to be kind of set. So I set myself a kind of a strategy of working. When I work well, I work really well. And I can go to the studio for, half a day or even a couple of hours. I can go and I can do something. And that's partly why the paintings have evolved like they have, I think, too, where I can't, if I was painting more gesturally, I might not feel I could go and do something and run away. But if you're just putting down a shape, you can put down a shape or prepare to put down a shape and then run off and then come back and do the next bit.
And that works well with your busy schedule.
It works okay. It dovetails in. Yeah.
And you just amaze me with your... Well, many things amaze me actually about you, Matthew.
Yes.
I love the school that you've created, which we need to talk about. But also, the fact that you have had 24 solo exhibitions since 1986. I counted them.
Right.
And more than 50 group shows since 1979.
Right.
So you've had a massive career in the visual arts.
I hadn't actually counted them.
I counted them.
I'm a bit surprised.
That's a lot.
Right.
And then you've done the teaching, you've had so much experience teaching the visual arts as well. And then, 10 years ago, you created your own art school.
Yeah.
So how did this happen?
Well, I mean, really, when I was at art school in my undergraduate, the dream job that we all wanted was to teach. If you taught a couple of days a week, you could earn enough money to cover rent and stuff and paint for the rest. And we were all capable of doing that after art school. I'm a little worried about this current generation and whether they're able to teach. That's just a personal view, I think. But anyway, so I got my first teaching job when I was 26, teaching adult education. And then it kind of grew from that point. I ended up getting, around 1988, I worked at Chelsea School of Art. I had a job. I was invited to come and teach colour theory, which is kind of odd because I had never really been taught colour theory that much. At art school, we glossed over it. And but I had a solo show in London, my first solo show at Sue Rankin Gallery, and somebody from the art school saw it, and in any case, Dad had been a tutor there, so I had that connection. Let's not approach this like I was just came in cold. There was that connection, and they said, "Will you come and teach the first year's colour theory?" And I thought, yeah, I said yes, like I do to most things. And then I thought, oh, crikey, I don't know anything about colour theory. What am I going to do with them? So I did masses of research, and I had this big book, and I went and did my first stint with the first years. And I remember one time one of them asked me a question about colour, and I really did not know the answer. And I said, oh, hang on a minute, I've just remembered I have to get something from the office. And I ran up the hallway to the office where there was this big Bible, colour book, Johann Itten's colour book. And I looked and found the answer, and then I nonchalantly, very relaxed, walked back into the class, and I just started to mill around with them, talking one-on-one. And then I just said, after about 5 minutes, I said, oh, yes, what was that question that somebody asked me? And somebody said, oh, I asked you so-and-so, and I had the answer. And so, and I had said to Dad before I had that teacher job, what can I teach them? I'm only 26. And he said to me, well, you just have to remember, compared to them, you know everything. And I thought, well, okay, that's quite a good way of approaching it. To start off,
I love that. That's such a good story. Yeah. It's like when you're young to teaching, you want to know everything and look like you're an expert. Yeah. And then as you get more experience in teaching, you're totally happy to say, I actually don't know the answer to that.
That's right. That's right.
It's a developmental thing, isn't it?
I mean, now people ask me things and I say, actually, I don't know. You're going to have to look that up.
Yeah.
But I felt like, God, I'm doing colour theory. I really should know this. Anyway, and then that was at the end of the 80s. I had that stint, and then I met my wife Melissa in London, and came to New Zealand, and I started teaching at Whitecliffe, and Greg Whitecliffe was actually very supportive. He was great, and I worked there for a number of years, and then in the early 90s, I got a job at Art Station in Ponsonby, which was a community art school, Studio One. And I worked there with John Eden and the most amazing group of people, and we had a great time, and I did picture framing as well for John Leach framing. So I had these few things going on. My car was like a roving office. It had framing bits in it, and it had teaching stuff in it. And I would duck from Whitecliffe to the university where I was doing community ed, and then I'd go to ArtStation, and I was all over the place.
And building your community.
Building all of that, yes. And then, at the same time, I had this little studio in Queen Street in the Sunday school building, which at that time was $50 a month. It was very cheap. And so, it was very doable, but quite small as a studio, or relatively small. And so I then, kept working at ArtStation Whitecliffe all through the 90s, and ended up going to Elam and doing all that stuff that we've talked about. And then around about 10 years ago, 11 years ago, there were rumblings that ArtStation was going to be restructured, and we didn't know what our jobs were going to be like. And I thought, well, I probably need to look around at something. And, years ago, when I was in 1983, my grandmother had said, you should open an art school, Matthew. And I said, I was here on a trip for a year, and I thought, well, I'm not going to open an art school. That's just ridiculous. It's too much like hard work. I don't want to do that. And all through my time at ArtStation, actually, students started saying to me at frequent intervals, you should have your own school. Why don't you have your own school? And I thought, well, I'm not going to get so full of myself to think that I can have my own school. It's ridiculous.
And why were they saying that, do you think?
Well, I think I have a rapport with students. I'm old enough now to be able to recognize the things that I do bring, rather than wondering what those things are. I think it's a kind of connectiveness.
And good at leading people.
Well, I must be, but I actually really like being a follower. I'm not that comfortable being the head of the school. I always wish I could duck and dive behind John Eden at ArtStation or something, like, John, can you help? But at the same time, I quite like control. So it's a funny kind of a mix. But then with the restructuring of ArtStation, I was riding my bicycle past this building on Great North Road, and the upper floor had this big sign, for lease. And I told some students about it. I said, hey, there's this guy down the road that's doing a lease thing. You should look at it for studios. And they went and talked to him, and he was quite tricky. He was a tricky landlord. And they said, we can't. He's worried about getting paint on the floor and all sorts of things, so we can't rent that. And so then a little while went by, and I talked to John Eden about it and opening a school, and he said, just do it. And I said, what do you mean, just do it? I've worked for you for years and years and years. Why would you want to lose me? And he said, look, Matthew, just do it. Well, of course, I think he knew more than he was telling me about what was going to happen. And so I did. I took the lease on the front part of the building, and it was just me. And I worked for the the latter part of that year with my classes there. I stopped teaching them at ArtStation, but the year-long classes continued until the end of that year, so I was still teaching those. So I was in the two places at once. And then at the end of that year, the students said, what are we going to do in the next year? When I'm in year 2, I want to do year 3. And I said, it's fine. Down the road. I'm going down the road. Why don't you come down the road? And they said at ArtStation they didn't want the year-long classes, so I just lock, stock, and barrel.
Them up. That's
there. So I was lucky.
Yeah.
And I had this group of students to set off, and it grew from there. And then I managed to get and persuade some of the people who had worked at ArtStation, who I knew to be great teachers. I managed to get them, Catherine Stevens, and various other people, Linda Roche. They all started to come to school, and they are amazing people. I mean, they put everything into teaching with me. And it's grown. I've got other people there now. I mean, there are about 15 different tutors on and off. There's probably a core group of about 6 or 7 or 8 of us who teach there. But really great people. Like, they just have to have, my proviso, they have to have a career painting. They have to have their thing happening. They can't just be a teacher. And so that means that, students want to see that you're doing it too. And it's
important.
hard. And so, the people who are teaching with me bring their particular skills, Anton Chapman, South African trained, great painter, advocate for a more of the traditional beginnings to learning to paint, learning to see and to adjust your vision to the relationships between things. I mean, he's an abstract painter now. But he's very entrenched in believing in those methods. And the other people, Lee Martin has just got a head full of incredible information. Kimberly Annan, who's teaching photography, is, they're all extraordinary people trying really hard in their field to make a living, make a go of it, because it's all very well to say, well, I'm creative, I just want to be creative, but we have to be grown up here and say, well, actually, on one hand, that's fine, but you need to pay your bills. How are you going to buy food and pay your rent and look after your children and all those things? You've got to have something.
And some predictability.
And so they're like, yeah, well, teaching, and I say to them, you're really good at this. You're good. And I do make a point really often at saying, as often as I can remember, to say to people who work with me, I really appreciate you and I value what you're doing. I could not do that, what I'm doing, without them. They are completely essential. If I lose one person, like recently Linda Roche decided to teach less, that was a big loss. But some people come forward and we manage to juggle around and replace people. I mean, at the end of the day, maybe none of us are completely indispensable, but they all bring very different experiences. And so with the year-long classes that we have, we try and bring different tutors in to each year as a different experience.
Which is such a good idea. I love that. So, and all of your educators or your tutors, I've done a few workshops at Browne School of Art, and they're also passionate about teaching, but also about their own practice and about encouraging creativity. Yeah. And it's just such a sort of dynamic, amazing space to be in.
Yeah.
It's very motivating.
I mean, I love being there. And I know that people say to me, wow, this feels really good here.
It does.
And actually, interestingly, somebody came to the school who had been a student at Browne School of Art, where I did my undergraduate, and said, we started chatting and found out that we'd been to the same school at slightly different times, but pretty close. And he said, the amazing thing is when I walked up here and I walked in, I thought, this feels like Camberwell.
Really?
And I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
It just shows how, those formative years and what you do become so pivotal on what might follow.
Yeah. And once again, like we talked about earlier, you can not realize how some of those things are influencing you until you look back and you think,
don't know.
Oh my God, that's actually connected to that.
That's right.
It's really interesting. And so you're still in Great North Road.
Still in Great North, still in the same premises.
Have you extended the space?
We've gone back. There was one space originally, and now we've got the 3 big studios, an exhibition gallery, very much a working exhibition gallery. It's nothing flash, but it's very, very workable. And students walk through it every week to and from classes. And so there's shows every 3 weeks that change. And then there's a library and an AV room and, the kitchen. And we've got everything we really need. And I have thought about expanding, but it's not at that point really to safely do that, I don't think. And also, I don't know, how big do I want it to be? Really.
Exactly.
And
sometimes growing the business doesn't actually add any value.
No.
So with your school, Matthew, why would somebody choose to go to Browne School of Art? And then, I guess as opposed to getting a degree or going to Elam or one of the other more known art schools, what would be the advantage?
Well, I think the thing is that before I opened the school, there were really only 2 options that people had in terms of studying. One was to go to art school, to go to an accredited art school, and for that you'd need to give up work, pretty much. It's quite expensive, and you've got children and responsibilities. It's quite hard to fit all that in around that. On the other side, you could go to Selwyn College or Corbyn's or Studio One, and you could do an art class in one of those places. But the thing is, I think they are, if somebody's listening from those places, they might be annoyed at me saying, but they seem to be a little bit more hobby orientated. I never thought of opening the school as a way of it being a hobby place. I always thought of it as being a more serious learning establishment. But I wanted to make it possible for people to have a job, to not ignore their family, not get into strife, and be able to have time at school with some really experienced, good teachers who could help them and give them structure, and where it wasn't just, let's paint a picture of your dog or some other aspect. Not that all those places do that, because I actually think that maybe the game has been lifted a bit in terms of teaching in a lot of places now. I think that in a certain period in history, like through the late 60s, 70s, there was a period where teachers in art schools were not so held accountable for what was going on, and now you have to think about that and do it properly. You're not just babysitting. So I wanted it to be somewhere where people could know, I can get a good education if I go to Browne School of Art. It's not extortionately expensive. I don't have to give up my job. I can do this.
Making it more accessible.
Yeah.
And it's also being realistic with what people can do. It's great.
I mean, of course, if people want that bit of paper, they have to go to one of the other places. And I have fought off internal ideas and suggestions occasionally from students. Why don't you get this school accredited?
Yeah.
But it would change it completely. And I don't think that that's a good idea, especially as if you do want to do that you can go to one of the others.
That's right.
You're not going to be able to come and do an accredited degree through Browne School of Art and come once a week. It's just, people think, I could just do it and then I could get a bit of paper and have a degree. Well, it wouldn't be like that. We'd have to jump through all the hoops that the NZQA throw at us. So I've avoided it. And actually, Deborah Crow, who is one of the other tutors at school, who's a wonderful artist and facilitator.
Yes, she is.
Very skilled.
She was a guest on the show.
Right. She's a very skilled facilitator indeed, and she comes and does stuff at school. And she said to me, "Oh, no, Matthew, don't do that. Don't do that. Don't get it accredited. It's
No,
don't go down that road."
I agree.
So I haven't.
And I don't think you need to.
No, but I do want people to feel like that actually they love coming there and that they feel fortunate to be there. I mean, that's something that I do say to students quite often. I say, you have to remember how lucky you are to be here and doing something you love. I mean, that's a privilege, isn't it?
Yeah.
To do something like that. So it comes down to that, and I'm generally pretty proud of a lot of the artists who come through the school. I mean, obviously not everyone wants the same thing. I mean, you have people like who I know you've interviewed, Mandy Roger, who are more ambitious. And you have people who are less ambitious, and some people just want to.
Okay.
It's absolutely fine. And my challenge to the students is to keep remembering why they came in the first place. What was it that you wanted? And go back to that. If you're coming and you wanted to do it because you love painting and you wanted something to give your life a sense of meaning and purpose and get you off the treadmill of going to work every day and coming home and going to work and coming home and giving yourself this time to do this thing, then, acknowledge that and be happy and thankful for that. It doesn't have to be that people come to the school and they're striving to be a practicing painter like me or any of the other people who teach at the school, because there's multiple ways of dealing with it.
Which is, I think that's a great aspect of what you provide. And it has got an amazing reputation. And I know so many people who have been through your school in some capacity, and everybody loves it.
Yeah,
you have created an amazing
I hear
community.
that, but I think it's not false modesty, but I'm not really aware of it. And I'm always very surprised if I'm talking to someone and they say, what do you do? And I say, I'm a painter. And they ask, and I run an art school, and they ask about the art school, and they say, oh yes, I know that one. I know that. I'm like, oh, really?
Yeah, it's very much like that. And it feels like you are providing something that nobody else is providing.
Well, nobody's doing it quite in that way. I mean, there are places that are set up, but purely as painting as a recreational pursuit. I mean, there are lots of people, of course, there are lots of people who come to the school, and it is, you know, one term, beginner's drawing class, boom, they're gone. We never see them again. Maybe they go and learn to play the trumpet or something next term. I don't know. But for lots of people, those classes are at the beginning. The term time classes are the beginning of something that can become a lifelong passion and becomes essential to their well-being in their life. And that is really what's important about it.
Yeah.
It's not whether you go down the exhibiting road with dealer galleries and all that stuff that I'm part of, and that several people who teach there are part of. There are other ways of doing it. And so when students get upset about, oh, no, you know, we had the show at the end of the year and nobody bought any of my work and all that sort of thing, I'm like, yeah, but that's not why you came here. Remember why you came here.
That's such a good way of
it's not that, and it's not a straight run. I've had in those number of shows you told me that I'd had, there have been numbers of them where I've had 0 sales, and I've had 1 or 2 where I've sold everything, and I have absolutely no idea why. Absolutely none whatsoever. So you can never, rest on the idea that actually sales and so on and so forth are the most important thing. You have to actually go back to why you went there in the first place. What made you want to do that in the first place? What gave you the buzz to do that?
That's what you have to hold on to.
You do.
But it is discouraging, but it is part of the journey.
Well, it is. It's very discouraging.
It's part of the journey.
But I'm quite good at destroying paintings, and I make paintings, and then I destroy them. If they're kind of not successful after a few years, or you can't keep everything.
No,
it's impossible.
And you're a painter, you're an artist, you are an art educator, but you're also a businessman and very entrepreneurial, and that is quite a hard sort of juggle to have all these different things going on. For you as an art educator to create a business and then think about all the business side of things is quite a big thing. I know as a business owner. There's a lot to it, a lot more than a lot of people realise.
Well, I mean, I smile sometimes when I think how naively I even went into it at the beginning. I just had faith in it, I suppose, and it had to work because I had a mortgage and small children. And I was like, well, I have to do something to support them. What am I going to do? I can't depend on other places to give me a job teaching. I've got to do it myself. But the business side of it is a constant learning experience. I mean, I would say to people who are doing it, number one, get yourself a really good accountant. I've got a really good accountant. They say you have to do budgets and things. Do you know, I've never done a budget, ever. I look at the figures and I can kind of see what's happening.
Yeah, I never did one either.
I'm very bad at that. But anyway, I have got a really good accountant that looks after things. And actually, the business started very, very small. and it was just me. And then it kind of just grew. I mean, I built the website, just started off, but now it's got so many pages on it. If I looked at it now and showed my former self that, I would have said, there's no way I can do that. Sorry, I'm not doing that.
Isn't it great?
But it started just with just a few pages, and then it grew. But still, it's a learning experience every day. I stumble through trying to work out how it goes. I'm not very good at monetary business sides of things. I don't like that side very much. You have to do it.
Yeah, you do.
If you've got to make it work.
My business mentor used to say to me, I've probably said this before on the podcast, that you're not in the business you think you're in the marketing business.
Yes.
Which is actually so true, because you can't do all the things you're passionate about without marketing what you're doing.
Yeah.
And it sort of goes hand in hand in a way. So you do become, you have to be good at so many different roles.
Yeah.
Or you get the people who are good to do them for you.
I mean, I'm not so naive to not realize. I mean, I realize that that there are things that I've become quite good at. I must be quite good at being a leader, like you said earlier, although I would never think of myself like that.
That's the best leader. Someone who doesn't realize.
I'm not aware of it. I must be quite good at attracting or corralling really good people to teach there, because they're all really good.
Yeah.
And the school is absolutely 100% only as good as the people who teach there. And I must be okay at business, because it's 10 years and we've gone through COVID and it's still going. So I don't know.
No, you've done well.
But if somebody asks me, how do you, I want to start a business, what did you do? I don't know.
Well, it's a journey. It's a massive journey.
I just think it's like I approach most things, which is look forward and have faith,
and hang in there.
Yeah.
And they say that if you can last 5 years, then you're probably going to be okay, which is
that's
so
right.
true.
I've heard that.
Yeah, and I could really see in my business after 5 years, it's been 9 years, my business.
Oh, nearly the same, right.
Yeah, I could see it just kind of tipped into another kind of business after 5 years.
Yeah.
You had that reputation.
Yeah.
You could predict that, yes, probably I am going to fill these classes because I know from the last year or two that I have.
Yeah.
And even though, I used to get so nervous and worried that nobody would come at the beginning.
But I still have that. And so I do not take it for granted at all, or assume anything. And actually, it is very unpredictable. Sometimes one class will go ahead one term and then it won't the next, and it's at the whim of the current cycle. I don't know why.
And are you feeling with the the current sort of situation in New Zealand of the high living costs and all of that kind of thing? Is that influencing who's booking, do you think? Or how many people are booking? Not
that noticeable. I mean, we've just been enrolling for year-long classes next year, which have been filling up at an unprecedented rate, actually. And every year I say to Melissa, my wife, I'm really worried about whether people will come this year because the economic climate's really bad. And she's like, you say that every year. And I said, do I? She said, you need to write it down. I want you to write down a date in this book that on this date you were worried about such and such, and then look at the figures.
Yeah.
And
don't worry.
But the necessary part of it is that I do worry about it, and I absolutely 100% do not take it for granted. That's just how it's always gone. It's always rolled like that for me. I don't know why.
It's a great attitude to have.
I think there's an uncertainty in the art business anyway.
Yeah. And,
because anything to do with art is thought of as being maybe, a luxury extension on the necessities of life. Where actually, for me and for a lot of people who are creative, they're actually necessities. They're not luxuries at all. If you take them away, we'd just kind of wither up and die.
Yeah, exactly.
And I say that to students too. That's one of the things I've said to them, some of the year-long students. Whether you go on into the next year, having done 1 year or not, depends on how you feel about where this sits with you in your life. If you feel like, nah, I can live without it, then maybe don't bother, because it's just another thing. But if you're like, no, I've got to do this. This is challenging. It's uncertain. There are multiple answers. They're all right and they're all wrong. Then maybe you should do it. You know, it's giving you something that's enriching in your life and problematic, and but also, you know, giving you something back that's affirmative. It's just it's a good thing
That's going
to have in your life.
Your life so much. And can you see yourself being the director of Browne School of Art when you're 90?
That's a really funny question, because that has been on my mind a little bit, and I did wonder at certain times. I think to myself, how will I ever get out of this school? If I want to, I don't want to, but how will I ever get out of it? And I was talking to Catherine Stevens about it the other day, and she said, "Oh, you won't. You'll just keep doing it."
Yeah,
because you know, I mean, I've never really just wanted to be a painter. I like people too much, and being a painter is isolating, and I find that difficult. But the balance of the two is great. I mean, I love going to my studio when it's busy at school. I feel like I'm running away and I'm escaping. But I wouldn't want to just do that. And so the school for me is a kind of, you know, a necessary thing as well. I mean, often as I'm getting older in the evenings, I sometimes will drag my feet a bit about an evening class. You know, there's another evening class, but every time I feel energized by it, and quite often I go home and Melissa will say, see, you know, you're all upbeat now. You're all upbeat now. You've done your class, whereas
sometimes
you went
it's
off
the best
kind
thing
of.
you can do.
Yeah, totally. And the reason I think is that, you know, with any job that you're doing, if you're doing it for other people, or if you're doing anything for other people at all, it doesn't really matter what it is. But if you're doing something for people that tangibly seems to make their life better, that's a huge reward.
It is.
It's a huge kick and a huge reward. And the problem with painting is when I go to the studio, it's all about me. And I find after a few weeks, sometimes on holidays when I'm at the studio, I call them the demons. The demons close in, and they're sort of the self-congratulatory kind of, you know, smug, just it's like you self-implode. I don't think it's healthy.
You're in your own head a lot.
And I'm always so the school gives me that sense that I'm doing something of value for others. And actually it's one of the few things, and you might have this too, where pretty much on a daily basis somebody will say something to me or write an email to me about how amazing the school has been for them, or the class has been for them, or how their life has changed.
Yeah.
Every day.
How amazing.
I mean, we had an email yesterday from somebody. We did a critique with a class on Tuesday, and somebody wrote an email in the class just saying, I wanted to say how amazing that critique was, and we talked about art and so forth afterwards, and how amazing it was, and
you're changing lives,
you know,
aren't you?
and
I think a lot of teachers feel like that if they're in the right kind of job.
Oh, well, I think if they're swamped, as in schools, with paperwork,
schools
and admin, that those things are problematic.
Yeah, very problematic.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, if you can give something, I do, like you said, I do feel the same. And even talking to people for the podcast, it's just like, no matter how I'm feeling before, I go away thinking, oh my God, I feel so inspired and
exactly.
so sort of fueled and fed.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful thing if you can find that in your life, and especially in your working life.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Now, I want to ask you, just before we get on to the last questions, Jenny and Michael, your beloved parents, have left a massive legacy for you, and have, I think, paved the way for this amazing career that you've built yourself. Yeah. What do you think you would like to pass on to your children as their legacy?
Well, more than anything, I think I'd like to pass on to them a sense of goodness more than anything else, but to be a good, thoughtful human being in society and to operate in society in a way that reflects that. No matter what they do, my children are not particularly enamored with the arts, as they seem to be forging different areas of interest. It's a bit hard to tell with my youngest, who's 17, who's hovering, but entrapped a bit by the whole kind of teaching in school system of unit standards, and it's not exactly conducive to creativity.
No.
It's just jumping through hoops. But I'd like them to probably, if they can think about me in the way that I've thought about think about my parents currently with my mother, that they've been brought up in a safe, nurturing, thoughtful, thinking of others household, then that's enough for me, and then they can do what they feel they need to do.
What would you say to your younger artistic self, do you think?
Yeah, I was thinking about that, because when I was younger, I was full of trepidation and uncertainty, but I was also a little bit cocky. I don't mean in a kind of really grating way, but I never felt doubt about anything very much. And so when I applied to art school and I went to art school, I got in and I was like, oh yeah, good, yeah, just kind of what I expected at each level. And I sort of took it a bit for granted, I think, in a way. But I think the naivety in me about life made me brave and made me keep moving forward. And so I would just say to my younger self, just keep moving forward. You don't have to know, but just keep moving forward and you'll be all right if you do that. If you stop and start looking back and reflecting too much when you're younger, things kind of unravel. So keep looking forward and try and keep optimistic. You have to always have that sense of hope within you. There's always problematic, isn't it, when that sense of hope is dashed by whatever happens in life, especially for younger people, and they don't know what to do, and you can see how important that is. But I would say, half the things I did in my younger years, I just did through sheer horror at saying, no, I can't do them. Like when I was 25, I got this phone call from Ken Howard, who is a Royal Academician in London. He's dead now, but he was a very, very close friend of my father's. And he said, I've recommended you as a writer for the Artist magazine in Britain. And I said, oh, really? And he said, yeah, I put your name forward. Anyway, I got a call from them, and they asked me, can you write an article once a month? Well, I hadn't written anything for years, not since I was at art school, and even then we didn't write that much. And I just said, oh, yeah, I can do that. Oh, how much do you want? Oh, 3,000-4,000 words a month? Yeah, I can do that. Article about products and so forth. So I think my naivety kind of and my young optimism kind of set me forward, but I would just say keep moving forward.
And your favorite artists and why?
That's a really tricky question.
It is.
Yeah, and I know, having listened to some of your other podcasts, people find that quite difficult. But I think it's wrapped up with, it fluctuates. And there are lots of painters who I really admire. But when I was 19, and I decided that I was going to paint, eventually decided that was the thing I was going to do, I happened upon Camille Pissarro. And Camille Pissarro became this kind of beacon of hope and light. He was this revered figure amongst the Impressionists. And, Camberwell was a little bit kind of old-fashioned, I think, because we didn't think about abstraction or anything like that. It was all figurative. And I was like, back there in the 1880s, hovering with the Impressionists, and I became really obsessed with him, and but also encouraged by him in lots of ways, and I went to all the places that the Impressionists had exhibitions in Paris. When I was 19, I trucked off over there to Paris, and I walked around Paris to all the buildings that they exhibited in, and I tried to imagine them being there, and then I tried to imagine that I was one of them, and this whole idea of them. So, and his paintings are just extraordinarily sensitive, beautiful, dances between reality and a kind of imaginative reordering that I think is really beautiful. They're extraordinary paintings. So Camille Pissarro is still up there as a favourite painter. But if we're thinking about now, there's a whole raft of people, British painters like Howard Hodgkin. I loved for a whole period, and I still enjoy his paintings. I really love probably, people like Jude Ray, who's got a show on at the moment. Mm-hmm. She's extraordinary. Giorgio Morandi, who obviously is an influence on her. Matt Arbuckle, who's got a show at Two Rooms at the moment. He's a very fine painter. So there are a number of really amazing painters out there doing their thing. Sometimes, it's transmuted through other painters and it reminds you of other painters. Sometimes it's something completely unique, but it does move around a bit. My likes and dislikes for them. I try not to get too embroiled in that like-dislike thing. Yeah. It's quite tricky.
Yeah.
It suddenly means that if you're talking about painting in terms of what's your favourite and what do you like and who do you like most, it's sort of like it almost takes painting down to a sort of like a commodity. Which pair of shoes are your favourite?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Do you know?
Yeah.
So I have difficulty with it. I understand it, but I have difficulty with it because I think it's very changeable, and it's also it's dependent on so many factors. There's so many factors to do with not just the way the paintings have been made, but also the ethos of the artist as well was wrapped up in it. If you see paintings you really like, but then you find out they've been painted by somebody who's thoroughly unpleasant, it affects how you see the paintings.
That's right. Totally.
So it kind of shifts a bit.
And that's good. That's a good answer. And what is your biggest challenge as an artist?
Biggest challenge as an artist would be probably keeping buoyant. Dad's voice goes off in my head with these kind of things, because he would say, just keep the cogs well oiled, Matthew. In other words, don't put a spanner in the works. Keep moving forward. Don't upset the cart. Just don't ruck everything up. But my biggest challenge would be probably a combination of things, actually. It would be hope and despair. And those two things, when I was a child, I was very highly excitable, and I was madly excited about a lot of things. And then consequently, I was incredibly disappointed by a lot of things. And so now I try not to get... It's a bit of a problem in a way sometimes, but I try not to get too excited about things until I know it's an absolute assured reality, because then I'm really disappointed. And so that would be my biggest challenge, is keeping myself level.
Yeah.
And because I'm a bit of a roller coaster, students would probably would not see that, but I'm a bit of a roller coaster. Melissa, my wife, would certainly say that. Whereas she is stable.
Good combo.
Yeah. She's like the stable rock around which the wild sea rolls,
It's very much like me and my husband.
Right.
I'm the stable one, by the way,
yeah,
if you were wondering. And what drives you, do you think, to make the kind of work you're currently making?
Yeah, what drives me to make the work would be a need to orientate myself in the world. You think it's a disorientating experience sometimes, and the paintings form, for me, the central hub of a wheel. They're like the point of least rotation, and that's my stable position. So when I'm in the studio, even if it's going wrong, I feel I'm on the ground, and I'm in a stable place around. And I think it's because it's the one place where I can determine and control to a certain degree things that are happening. Whereas outside of that, I don't feel I can so much. It's dependent on so many other things. But yes, yeah.
I know what you mean. Well, that brings us to a close. It stopped raining. That's good. The puppy has stopped crying on the deck. And it's been such a pleasure to meet you, Matthew. I've long wanted to sit down and talk to you. And even just connecting, I remember, going into your school thinking, oh, where's Matthew? I want to introduce myself.
You should have.
Yeah, I should have. I probably couldn't find you. You're too busy or something.
I was probably at the studio.
Yeah, probably. But yeah, it's great to meet you. I think you're an inspiration and
Thank you.
A New Zealand legend. And I'm very delighted that you chose to come on the podcast. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure. An indulgent pleasure to sit here and talk about myself for 2 hours.
So good, isn't it? So good.